And I'd like to welcome you all here. Us, Causa, Concilio, and Mixed American Studies are proud to have Ramsey Muniz here as a speaker today. And before we get the program started, we're going to have give you a little background for some of you who don't know Ramsey very well, or some updating. And we're going to have Dr. Armando Gutierrez, professor here of political science, and Dr. Tacho Mendiola will kind of give us an update on Ramsey's situation, his contributions, and some of the stuff he's done for the Chicano people and for the American society in general. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Tacho Mendiola, Director of Mexican American Studies.
Thank you, Luna. Well, I've been trying to think about what I would like to say about Ramsey Muniz, an individual that I've known now for some 15 years. And I think that Ramsey Muniz is an individual who will definitely go down in history. But I do not think that he will go down in history as a man. I think he will go down in history as a symbol. As a symbol of an individual who worked his way out of one of the poorest barrios in Corpus Christi, La Molina, and sought to improve himself. As a symbol of an individual who was on university campuses in the early 60s and therefore represented for the first time in the history of this country the largest number of Mexican Americans ever to be educated by American universities. And a symbol, for sure, because Ramsey called himself a Chicano. And by calling himself a Chicano, represented a new and determined group of individuals who were critical of American society and their treatment of Mexican Americans in this country. And of course, he will go down as a symbol, as that individual who probably more than any other individual brought the Raza Unida Party state, national, and international recognition, and in the process called attention to the situation of Mexicanos, not only in Texas, but in the United States. So to me, this is what Ramsey Muniz symbolizes. To me, these are the reasons why I think Ramsey has secured a place in our history. So it is both not only a pleasure, but indeed an honor to have known Ramsey these years, to have been his personal friend, to have visited with him in his house, to have spent countless hours talking about philosophy, ideology, and organizing strategies. So on behalf of the Mexican American Studies program, I welcome Ramsey Muniz to the University of Houston. Now I would like to introduce Armando Gutierrez, who will then introduce Ramsey Muniz.
Okay, I'm in a little bit different position. I didn't think a whole lot beforehand, because I was just told that I was going to do this introduction. Let me add, as someone who's from Corpus, La Molina is not only a poor neighborhood, it's a rough neighborhood. Some bad dudes come out of there, I guarantee you. Anyway, basically what I wanted to do, or what I was asked to do, is very briefly try and give you some background on not only Ramsey, but the campaign, the Partido. For those of you who, I was in my class the other day, I was talking about the Vietnam War, and some of my students raised their hand and said, hey, I was only 8 years old during the Vietnam War, right? Anyway, but so I realized that some people who may not be real familiar with what was going on in 1970, 71, 72, right? As Tacho mentioned, the Raza Unida Party was essentially formed in late 1969, early 1970, of course, particularly in Zavala County and Crystal City. At that time, the idea behind the organization was to develop as basically a grassroots organization in those communities, those counties in South Texas that had a majority Chicano population. There are 26 counties. If you draw a line from Del Rio to San Antonio to Corpus, inside of that line, there are 26 counties that have a majority Mexican-American population. And the idea was to try and organize people there through the avenue of a separate political entity, a separate political party. So it began then as a grassroots kind of movement in that direction. Now, the fact of the matter is, of course, that there are many, many Mexican Americans, indeed the majority of Mexican Americans, who live outside of that line, in places like Houston, places like Dallas, Lubbock, El Paso, and so on, just speaking of Texas. The point being that fairly quickly the idea of a separate political entity, a separate political party, caught fire. And people from throughout the state, and indeed throughout the nation, Chicanos from throughout the state and throughout the nation, were demanding that they too be given something to do, some kind of a voice, some kind of an alternative, such as Raza Unida. The result of that was that the organization at a planning meeting decided that it would field a candidate for governor in the 1972 elections here in the state of Texas. One of the reasons that Ramsey was chosen, among others, was that he was the only one that was old enough, at the time was going to be old enough, in the state of Texas you have to be 30 years old, to be governor. We assumed he was going to be elected, and so therefore we decided we should have him run, right? To be very frank, for those people that were involved in that decision, we had a good deal of trepidation, not only just about running a candidate for governor, but indeed about Ramsey, since some of us anyway did not know him that well. Believe me, everyone was amazingly, pleasantly surprised, overwhelmed indeed, by the choice. The kind of charisma, the kind of attraction that Ramsey brought to that campaign, the kind of enthusiasm that he generated among Chicanos from all walks of life. Even though he was a lawyer, he had the capacity, which no one else in the movement at that particular time had the capacity of being able to attract huge numbers of working class, poor Mexican Americans who never had been involved in the political process before. And again, generating an enthusiasm that went beyond simply saying, okay, come election time, I'm going to go and pull a lever. But it was an enthusiasm that they were willing to go out and work, willing to go out and organize, knock on doors, etc., etc. To make a long story short, the result of that was that in the 1972 elections, Ramsey spent less than $10,000 and was able to get almost 250,000 votes here in the state of Texas. I say that, and as a point of reference, I might add that, for example, in 1976, the Socialist Workers' Party, and I'm not meaning to cast any kind of aspersions on them as an organization or as people, but they, for example, in the 1976 presidential election, throughout the nation, got 96,000 votes. Ramsey in the state of Texas was able to garner almost 250,000 votes, to be exact, 214,000 votes. That translated to a percentage of about 6.8% of the election. The significance of that, I think, just speaks for itself. But there's other reasons that it was significant. It was significant, number one, because no third party in the history of the state of Texas had ever received more than 1% of the vote. All of the political experts, all of the political polls said that he would get no more than 1% of the vote. So that there was this total surprise in just in terms of the number percent of vote that he got. Number two was that in that election, where Dolph Briscoe and Hank Grover were the Democratic and Republican candidates, the difference in the election was less than 100,000 votes. The point being, of course, that Ramsey held the balance of power in that election, and indeed, Briscoe was elected by less than a majority. By less than a majority. He got approximately 46% of the vote. That was the first time that had happened in over 100 years in the state of Texas, that a governor had been elected by a plurality. But more importantly than that, I think, as Tacho mentioned, the symbolic thing was that the enthusiasm that was generated among Chicanos was quite astounding. And of course it spread very quickly, so that Raza Unida organizations developed in 27 different states in Texas. In 1974, Ramsey ran again for governor, and again polled approximately 6.3% of the vote. It was a smaller total number, but that was because there was a total turnout. As you know, turnout is higher in the presidential election years than when there's not a presidential election. So that with that kind of enthusiasm, then with the kind of support that Ramsey generated, I might add that I ran as a state representative in Austin under Ramsey Muniz when Ramsey was running for 74 for governor. And again, the kind of enthusiasm that we found in the community among Chicanos and among blacks and among particularly young students was again something to behold that I had not seen before, and I certainly have not seen since. And so that this again was the impact that Ramsey had. I don't think I have to tell you that after that there were a variety of efforts. I have 6,000 pages of documents from the FBI and CIA that demonstrate some of the activities that they engaged in, not only aimed at the Chicano movement generally and Ramsey Muniz Party specifically, but most specifically at Ramsey himself. The upshot of which was that, of course, he was eventually sent to prison and served, I'm told, almost 5 years. I made the mistake of saying yesterday 3 to 4, and was recently paroled in December of 1980. I had not seen Ramsey in some time. I had talked to him over the telephone, but I am quite pleased to see that he is looking good and has not, even after that time, lost the enthusiasm that made him such a fantastic candidate and such a fantastic individual. And again, it is at the level not only of personal friendship, but in terms of respect for someone who, as Tacho said, has a place in Chicano history that I feel most honored, and ask you to give a warm welcome to Ramsey Muniz.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. And it's been a long time since I've appeared publicly or since I've spoken to anybody out in the so-called free world. And a los mexicanos y las mexicanas que están aquí, les doy las gracias sinceramente con todo mi corazón. No nomás porque son mexicanas y son mexicanos, pero más importante porque miro que nos estamos tratando como hermanas y como hermanos. I thank the student body and the organization, Tacho and Gutierrez, for fine words, and most of all, I thank you for taking the time, because I feel that we'll be able to share something, and we'll be able to communicate with each other about not only what we think our politics is, or what our direction for Mexicanos will be, but also to be able to share the problems that we will be encountering during this administration, or should I say, during this regime. I've always found it very enthusiastic to speak to students, because you don't find only Mexicanos, and if you find some, you find very few. And the few that you find, for some reason or another, think that when you get educated, you're supposed to change. And but we find all kinds of students, and we find all kinds of races, and we find all kinds of people with different ideas. And I think that it's fortunate at this point and at this time that we'll be able to communicate with each other. What I have to say, you might not agree with 100%. In fact, you might not even agree with it at all. And I respect that. I respect the individual rights that you have. And for how long you will have them, I don't know. But I know that on paper, you have some. And I'm not up here to get into a racist confrontation. But I will tell you that I am a very proud Mexicano. And I shall always be a very proud Mexicano till the day I die. That is something that no institution, no prison, no system, no government can ever take away from me. They can take my license, they can say what they want to say, and they can take everything else, but they can't take this. Because what goes with that, I have to go with it. And with that, I only have to tell you that I feel that the direction of the Mexicanos in this state, in the Southwest, and in the United States is going to be a direction that we must take, or that you must take, or that someone has to lead in order to bring about the changes that have not been brought about for our people. And those changes have not been brought about for various reasons. Reasons that sometimes we cannot help. And sometimes reasons that we can help, but we refuse to take the necessary steps. But the time is prime, and the time is right to let this two-party system, to let whatever institution there is that continues to oppress not only our rights, but your rights, and let them know that you have decided to become an A student, and that you have decided to use your intelligence, and that you have decided to let them know that you're not satisfied. As Mexicanos, as Chicanos, there was a new word that came out when I was incarcerated, now they call it Hispanics. It's a new one on me. It was a hard one, because I couldn't understand it at the very beginning until somebody explained it to me. And I saw another means by this system of directing us into a direction that we can be ignorant of from the very beginning. And that direction is that if we already know that we shall be the largest minority in this country, then let us speak like the largest minority in this country. And don't give us any names. Just let us tell you que somos mexicanos, y ahí se acaba. To let them know that if we and you have agreed with us that this man up here in Washington, D.C. has already told us, and he tried to hide the facts, and they tried to see if they could some way or another not get everybody on the census, not guarantee you a bunch of mexicanos que no pusieron nombre, a whole bunch of 15 y 15, no, ¿cómo vamos a poner 15 familias? Ponle nomás 2, ¿no? Se mira muy mal. So there was a whole bunch de mexicanos nuestros que weren't counted either. But when you get that large number y comienzas a pensar que hay un bonche de mexicanos en este estado y un bonche de mexicanos en México y lo único que está es un río, there's a whole bunch of Mexicans. So you better call them something else, and let's kind of direct them and call them Hispanics, So when you come talk to us, don't come talk to us like Mexicans, talk to us like Hispanics. Y los tapados aquellos se creen y andan hablando como Hispanic. Well, I'm a Hispanic. ¿Qué hablas? Pregúntale a tu mamá qué eres y ella te dice que eres mexicana. But those are the things that happen to us. Those are the directions, and those are the people that continues to lead us into that kind of direction. Because you know what you are. Nobody needs to go around telling what you are. I respect, if he's white, I respect a man's white. If that lady's black, she's black. The only thing I can see, the lady's black. Now how am I going to go around telling her she might be polka dot, or she might be another color? The woman's black. And then at that point, we get to respect each other at that particular point because we know what we are. For you young Mexicanos y Mexicanas, I'm going to tell you something. It's rough on you. I don't blame somebody for coming and telling me que no saben qué es lo que son. Or they don't know what kind of direction, or they don't even know. It's rough because of all the implementation and the programming that you've had in your minds. I don't blame your parents. I don't blame them either. I don't blame any of that. The only thing that we need to do is for us, para ustedes mismos, to take the direction that you want to take. Because the movement, the politics, and the changes in this country are not going to come from upstairs. And they're not going to come from the man and the woman that are already settled. And they're not going to come from the status quo. They're going to come from the young people. It's always come from the young people. History repeats itself. Okay? It comes from the young people. It comes from the youth. And we as a party, and we as a movement, and we as whatever you want to call it, we made an era in that we had a long span of years of no leadership within the youth. That we developed no leadership. That we didn't take the time to plan. That we didn't take the time to foresee the problems that were going to be existing. That we didn't foresee that if a party was so criminally involved in a conspiracy against democracy in 1972, we couldn't foresee that that same party would put an actor as a president of this country. We couldn't foresee those things because we didn't think that the people would